step behind the lens, and look beyond the boundaries of ordinary storytelling. Join us as we explore the defining moments in history, capturing the exact seconds that changed our world forever.
Officer, I saw the boy fall in the water and I pulled him out. That's what happened. Multiple people saw it happen.
Officer, this young man is a hero. He saved that child's life. We all
I'm sitting right over there. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but I need to investigate all possibilities.
Officer Trent Vaughn had been patrolling Piedmont Park in Atlanta for 6 years, and he'd developed what he considered good instincts about suspicious behavior. Adults alone near playgrounds, anyone who seemed too interested in children. Patterns that, in his mind, required investigation regardless of what witnesses claimed. On the afternoon of July 14, 2024, when he responded to a 911 call about a child pulled from the lake and arrived to find a soaking wet black man kneeling next to a white boy wrapped in a towel, every instinct told him something criminal had happened, and despite a dozen witnesses insisting the man had just saved the child from drowning, Vaughn focused on what he saw as the more likely scenario, an attempted abduction or assault that this crowd was too naive to recognize. What he didn't know was that the man he was about to detain and accuse of harming a child was Dr. Isaiah Bennett, a pediatric emergency physician at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, who'd saved hundreds of children's lives, and that his decision to ignore witness testimony and viral video evidence in favor of racial bias would cost him his badge and make national headlines as a definitive case of heroism punished by racism. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe that heroes deserve recognition, not suspicion, then hit the like and subscribe button here on JPTV. Piedmont Park sat in the heart of Atlanta at 1071 Piedmont Avenue NE, a sprawling 200-acre urban green space that had served the city since 1904. On a Saturday afternoon in mid-July, the park was packed with people seeking relief from Georgia's summer heat. Families claimed spots under oak trees for picnics, joggers circled the walking paths, and the Lake Claramere attracted children who wanted to feed the ducks or play near the water's edge where the grass met the shore. Dr. Isaiah Bennett was sitting on a bench about 50 yards from the lake, eating a late lunch between shifts. He was 34 years old, a pediatric emergency medicine physician at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta's main campus in the city. He'd been working in the pediatric ER for 6 years after completing his residency at Emory, and his schedule was brutal. 12-hour shifts treating the sickest children in the region, making life or death decisions, comforting terrified parents, saving lives on a regular basis. Today was his day off between a Wednesday-Friday stretch and a Sunday-Tuesday rotation, and he'd come to the park to decompress, to sit in the sun and eat a sandwich and not think about work for an hour. He was dressed casually in a navy blue t-shirt, basketball shorts, and running shoes, his hospital ID and keys left in his car parked on 10th Street. He had a book open on the bench next to him, though he'd been too tired to actually read it, mostly just people watching and enjoying being outside. His phone was in his pocket, and he'd been debating whether to go for a run or just head home and take a nap before his next shift started at 6 a.m. tomorrow. That's when he noticed the family near the lake. A white couple in their mid-30s had spread out a large blanket about 30 feet from the water, setting up what looked like an elaborate picnic with a cooler, a portable speaker playing music, and enough food for a small party. They were laughing with another couple who joined them, opening wine, completely absorbed in their conversation. Their son, a blond boy who looked about 7 years old, was playing near them with a remote-control boat, walking toward the lake to launch it in the water. Isaiah watched with mild interest as the boy, wearing a red t-shirt and cargo shorts, set the boat in the shallow water near the shore and used the controller to send it out toward the middle of the small lake. The boy was focused entirely on the boat, walking along the edge of the water, trying to keep it in range of the controller. His parents glanced over occasionally, but were mostly engaged in their adult conversation, trusting that their child was old enough to play independently. The boat got caught in some weeds about 15 feet from shore, and the boy waded in ankle deep trying to reach it with a stick. Isaiah noticed this and felt a small flutter of concern because the drop-off at Lake Claramere was steep in some places, going from shallow to over your head deep within a few feet. But the boy seemed careful and his parents were right there, so Isaiah went back to his sandwich. Then the boy stretched too far, reaching with the stick for the boat, and lost his footing. Isaiah saw it happen in what felt like slow motion, the boy's feet slipping on the muddy bottom, his arms windmilling for balance, and then he was in the water, going under immediately. Isaiah was on his feet before the boy even surfaced, dropping his sandwich, his body moving on instinct, honed from years of medical training that prioritized immediate response to emergencies. He ran toward the lake yelling, "Hey, the boy!" to get the parents' attention, but they were 40 feet away with music playing and didn't hear him. The boy surfaced once, gasping and flailing, clearly unable to swim, then went under again. Isaiah didn't slow down. He hit the water at a full sprint, diving forward when it got deep enough, swimming hard toward where he'd seen the boy go down. The water was murky, clouded with sediment and algae, and he had to dive under to find the child. His fingers touched fabric and he grabbed it, pulling the boy up from about 4 feet down. The child was panicking, coughing, trying to breathe water, his eyes wide with terror. Isaiah got an arm around him and started swimming back to shore, holding the boy's head above water while kicking hard with his legs. By the time he reached the shallow water, a crowd had gathered. The parents had finally noticed their son was missing and were running toward the lake screaming his name. Other park goers had seen Isaiah dive in and were standing at the water's edge, ready to help. Isaiah carried the boy onto the grass and set him down, and the child immediately started coughing up water, his body convulsing with the effort to clear his lungs. "You're okay. You're okay," Isaiah said, kneeling next to him, one hand on the boy's back, supporting him while he coughed. "Just breathe. You're safe now. Get it all out." The boy, Ethan, was crying and coughing simultaneously, terrified but breathing. Isaiah checked his pulse, looked at his color, assessed his breathing pattern with the automatic competence of someone who'd done this assessment thousands of times in the ER. The child was going to be fine, scared and probably sore from coughing, but fine. An elderly woman, Ruth, who'd been sitting on a nearby bench with her husband, rushed over with a blanket. "Oh my God, you saved him! I saw the whole thing! You just dove right in!" "Is he okay?" a jogger asked, stopping with her phone already out and calling 911. "He's okay," Isaiah confirmed. "He needs to be checked by paramedics, but he's breathing well. What's your name, buddy?" "Ethan," the boy managed between coughs. That's when the parents arrived. Sarah, the mother, let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, and dropped to her knees, reaching for her son. But when she saw Isaiah, a soaking wet black man kneeling over her white child, her expression shifted from relief to something else. Not gratitude, but fear. She grabbed Ethan and pulled him away from Isaiah, clutching him against her chest. "What happened?" she demanded, looking at Isaiah with suspicion rather than thankfulness. "What were you doing with my son?" Ryan, the father, arrived a second later, breathing hard, and his eyes went from his crying son to Isaiah and his face hardened. "Who are you? What did you do?" Isaiah stood up slowly, hands visible, water dripping from his clothes. "Your son fell into the lake. I pulled him out. He's okay, but he should be checked by paramedics." "He fell in?" Sarah looked at the water, then back at Isaiah like she didn't believe him. "We were right there. How did he fall in?" "He was trying to reach his boat," Isaiah explained, keeping his voice calm and professional. "He lost his footing and went under. I saw it happen and pulled him out." Ruth stepped forward, her voice firm despite her age. "Young man, this gentleman saved your boy's life. I was sitting right over there and saw the whole thing. Your son went under twice and this man dove in and got him. You should be thanking him." Other witnesses were nodding, confirming the account, but Sarah's grip on Ethan didn't loosen, and Ryan's expression didn't soften. They were looking at Isaiah like he was a threat, like his presence next to their child required explanation beyond the obvious fact that he'd just saved the boy from drowning. A teenager named Jordan, who'd been skateboarding nearby, held up his phone. "I got it on video. The kid fell in and this guy ran in after him. It was like action movie fast." But before anyone could say more, sirens approached. Someone had called 911, and within 2 minutes an ambulance and a police car pulled up on the access road near the lake. Paramedics jumped out and headed toward the group, and from the patrol car stepped Officer Trent Vaughn. Vaughn was 39 years old, a 6-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department assigned to park patrol and community policing in Midtown. He'd grown up in Marietta, a predominantly white suburb, and had carried suburban assumptions about race and crime into his urban policing. His personnel file showed he was active and engaged, but it also contained 4 complaints over 6 years for racial profiling and excessive suspicion of black men in parks and public spaces, particularly when white families were present. All 4 complaints had been investigated and dismissed as unsubstantiated or within officer discretion. When Vaughn approached the scene, what he saw fit perfectly into his biased framework: a wet black man, a crying white child being held by frightened white parents, a crowd of onlookers, and the kind of chaos that his training told him required immediate control and investigation. What he didn't see, or chose not to see, was a hero who just saved a life. He walked past the witnesses trying to explain what happened and went directly to Sarah and Ryan. "Are you the parents? Is your son hurt?" "He's okay, I think," Sarah said, still clutching Ethan. "This man was in the water with him. We don't know exactly what happened." Vaughn's eyes locked on Isaiah, taking in his wet clothes, his proximity to the family, and making instant assumptions. "Sir, step back from the family. I need you to move over there." He pointed to a spot away from the crowd, his hand drifting near his weapon. Isaiah took a breath, recognizing the shift in tone, the suspicion in the officer's posture. "Officer, I pulled the child out of the lake. He was drowning. These witnesses can confirm." "I said step back, now. I'll get to you in a minute." Ruth raised her voice, indignant. "Officer, this young man is a hero. He saved that child's life. We all saw it." But Vaughn was already focused on his narrative, already interviewing the parents whose vague suspicions matched his bias better than the witnesses' clear testimony. And Isaiah, standing there, soaking wet with lake water dripping from his clothes, realized with sinking dread that saving a child's life might not be enough to overcome the color of his skin in the eyes of an officer who'd already decided what kind of person he was looking at. Isaiah stood 20 feet away from the family he'd just saved, dripping wet and watching Vaughn interview the parents while ignoring the witnesses who kept trying to explain what happened. The paramedics were checking Ethan, who was breathing fine but still coughing occasionally, and Sarah kept looking over at Isaiah like he was dangerous rather than the reason her son was alive. Ruth walked over to Vaughn, her elderly husband James right behind her, and spoke firmly. "Officer, my husband and I were sitting on that bench over there and we saw everything. The boy fell in the water while his parents weren't watching, and this gentleman ran over and jumped in to save him. He's a hero, not a suspect." "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but I need to investigate all possibilities here," Vaughn said dismissively. "Please step back and let me do my job." "Your job should be thanking him," Ruth's voice rose. "We're telling you what happened. Why aren't you listening?" Jordan, the teenager with the skateboard, pulled out his phone and walked up to Vaughn. "Dude, I literally have it on video. Want to see it before you make this worse?" Vaughn barely glanced at the phone. "I'll review any evidence once I've secured the scene and made sure the child is safe." "The child is safe because of him," Jordan pointed at Isaiah. "This is crazy." But Vaughn was already walking over to Isaiah with the body language of someone approaching a suspect rather than someone who just prevented a tragedy. His hand rested near his weapon, and his expression was hard. "What's your name?" Vaughn demanded. "Isaiah Bennett. I'm a doctor at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I saw the boy fall in the water, and I pulled him out. That's what happened." "A doctor?" Vaughn said it like he didn't believe it. "What were you doing at the park?" "Having lunch. It's my day off. I was sitting on that bench over there when I saw the child fall in." "Why were you watching the child?" Isaiah felt anger flash through him at the implication. "I wasn't watching him specifically. I was sitting in a public park, and I happened to notice when a kid fell into the water and started drowning. So I did what any decent person would do, and I saved him." "Uh-huh, so you just happened to be watching this particular family? This particular child?" "I happened to be in a park where there are dozens of families, and I noticed when one of them was in danger." "Is that a crime?" Vaughn stepped closer, invading his space. I'm going to need to see some identification, and I need you to explain exactly what you were doing in the water with that child. Isaiah pulled his wallet from his wet shorts pocket, the leather soaked through. He handed over his driver's license, watching Vaughn examine it with obvious suspicion. I already explained. The child fell in. He went under. I dove in and pulled him out. Multiple people saw it happen. There's video of it happening. What exactly are you investigating? I'm investigating why a grown man was in the water with someone else's child. Vaughn turned and called over his shoulder to his partner who just arrived. Mitchell, I need you to get statements from the parents about whether they saw this individual near their son before the incident. The witnesses were getting agitated now. More people had gathered, and several of them were recording on their phones. A woman who'd been jogging nearby spoke up. I saw the whole thing from the path. The kid fell in and went under, and this man ran from a bench and dove in after him. Nobody was watching that kid except him, and that's why the kid is alive. Another witness, a man who'd been fishing nearby, added, the parents were on their blanket drinking wine and not paying attention. This guy saved their son while they weren't looking. You should be writing them a ticket for negligence, not harassing their kid's rescuer. But Vaughn wasn't backing down. He'd committed to his narrative, and the witness testimony wasn't matching what his bias told him had happened. Sir, I need you to come with me to give a formal statement about why you were in physical contact with this child. Physical contact? Isaiah's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. I was saving his life. He was drowning. That's what you say, but I have concerned parents who want answers about why their son ended up in the water with a stranger. Sarah and Ryan hadn't actually said that directly, but Vaughn was interpreting their shocked reactions and vague concerns as accusations that fit his assumptions better than the clear testimony of people who'd actually witnessed what happened. Jordan pushed forward with his phone. Okay, seriously, just watch the video. It's 15 seconds long, and it shows everything. Vaughn finally looked at the phone screen. The video was crystal clear. Ethan at the water's edge reaching for his boat, losing his balance, falling in and going under, and then Isaiah sprinting from a bench 50 yards away, diving into the water fully clothed, surfacing with the boy and swimming him to shore. It was unambiguous evidence of exactly what Isaiah and the witnesses had been saying. Vaughn watched it, handed the phone back, and still didn't change his approach. I need to verify this wasn't edited or taken out of context. Sir, you're being detained for investigation. Put your hands behind your back. Isaiah couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're detaining me for saving a child's life after watching video proof of what happened? You're being detained so I can complete my investigation. Put your hands behind your back now. This is insane, Ruth shouted. We're all standing here telling you he's a hero, and you're treating him like a criminal. The crowd was getting louder, more upset, more vocal about the injustice they were watching. The paramedics had finished checking Ethan and were loading him into the ambulance for transport to the hospital as a precaution, and Sarah climbed in with him, still looking back at Isaiah with suspicion instead of gratitude. Ryan stayed behind, approached Vaughn, and spoke quietly. Officer, I want to make sure we understand what happened. We weren't watching as carefully as we should have been. Sir, I'm handling this. I just need to verify everything and make sure your son is safe. He is safe. Because of that man. Ryan's voice was uncertain now, like he was starting to realize his initial reaction had been wrong. But Vaughn had already made his decision. He grabbed Isaiah's arm and pulled it behind his back, and Isaiah felt the cold metal of handcuffs closing around his wrists, while 40 witnesses watched in disbelief and multiple phones recorded every second of a hero being treated like a criminal because the officer couldn't see past his skin color to the truth everyone else could see clearly. The handcuffs went on in front of 40 witnesses, 12 of whom were recording on their phones, and the crowd's reaction shifted from disbelief to outrage. Jordan, the teenager with the original video, immediately posted it to TikTok with the caption, "Man saves drowning kid, cop arrests him," and it started spreading before Isaiah was even placed in the back of the patrol car. Ruth refused to leave. She planted herself in front of Vaughn's supervisor who just arrived and demanded to know why a hero was in handcuffs. I'm 72 years old and I've been coming to this park for 30 years. I saw that young man risk his life to save a child, and you're treating him like a criminal. What is wrong with you people? Sergeant Patricia Morrison arrived 10 minutes later, called by Vaughn's partner, who was deeply uncomfortable with how the situation was unfolding. Morrison was a 20-year veteran who'd seen enough bad stops to recognize one immediately, and what she found was a PR nightmare in progress. Multiple civilians were shouting about police bias, several were filming, and her officer had detained someone in handcuffs who apparently everyone present agreed was a hero. "What's the situation?" Morrison asked Vaughn, pulling him aside. "Possible child endangerment, ma'am. Parents were concerned about how their son ended up in the water with this individual. I'm detaining him pending investigation." Morrison looked at the crowd of angry witnesses, at the phones recording, at Isaiah sitting in the back of the patrol car still soaking wet. "Did you watch the video?" "Yes, but I can't verify it's authentic or complete." "Show me." Jordan played the video for Morrison on his phone, and she watched the 15 seconds of footage showing Isaiah's heroic rescue. Then she asked the witnesses to describe what they saw and got consistent accounts from 8 different people, none of whom knew each other, all telling the same story. "Officer Vaughn, uncuff him, now." Morrison's voice was cold and final. When Isaiah was released from the patrol car, Morrison approached him directly. "Dr. Bennett, I apologize for this incident. You're free to go. Thank you for what you did today." But the damage was already done. Isaiah's hands were marked from the cuffs, his clothes were still wet, and he'd been detained and handcuffed for saving a child's life. The humiliation burned hotter than any physical discomfort. "I want to file a formal complaint," Isaiah said, his voice steady despite his anger. "I saved a child from drowning, and your officer treated me like a predator in front of everyone here. I'm a pediatric emergency physician. I save children's lives for a living, and I was handcuffed for doing it in a park." Morrison nodded. "I understand, and you have every right to file that complaint. I'll make sure it's processed immediately." The real unraveling started when the media picked up the story. By evening, Jordan's video had 5 million views. By the next morning, it was on every local news station with headlines like, "Doctor saves a drowning child, gets arrested," and "Hero handcuffed after park rescue." The video showed everything: Isaiah's sprint to the water, his dive, his rescue, and then, in videos from other witnesses, his detention and handcuffing while the crowd protested. Then Isaiah's credentials came out. Children's Healthcare of Atlanta released a statement confirming that Dr. Isaiah Bennett was a board-certified pediatric emergency medicine physician who'd been on staff for 6 years with an exemplary record. His colleagues described him as someone who'd saved countless children's lives, who worked extra shifts during crises, who mentored residents and medical students. The hospital showed photos of him receiving awards for clinical excellence, teaching honors, patient care recognition. His background made Vaughn's treatment of him even more indefensible. This wasn't just any good Samaritan. This was a doctor whose entire career was dedicated to saving the children, who had more medical training and child safety expertise than anyone at that park, who'd acted on professional instinct to rescue a drowning child. The investigation into Vaughn's history revealed the pattern Morrison had suspected. 6 years on the force, 4 complaints of racial profiling, all involving black men in parks or public spaces where white families were present. In one case, he detained a black father at a playground and demanded proof the children he was pushing on swings were actually his kids. In another, he questioned a black man jogging through a neighborhood, assuming he was casing houses. Every complaint had been dismissed as officer discretion or misunderstanding. The parents' initial reaction also came under scrutiny. Sarah and Ryan gave a statement to the media apologizing to Isaiah and thanking him for saving Ethan's life. But they couldn't escape questions about why their first instinct had been suspicion instead of gratitude. Their explanation that they were in shock and scared didn't account for the fact that a dozen witnesses were immediately telling them their son's rescuer was a hero, yet they'd expressed doubt and concern that fed into Vaughn's bias. Ethan, thankfully, was fine. The hospital kept him for observation and released him the same day, with instructions to watch for secondary drowning symptoms. He told the doctors and his parents clearly that The nice man saved me from the water when I was scared. A 7-year-old child understood what the officer, and initially his own parents, hadn't, that Isaiah was his rescuer, not a threat. The viral nature of the case meant that there was no way to quietly handle it internally. The Atlanta Police Department faced intense pressure from civil rights organizations, medical associations, and the public demanding accountability. The video evidence was irrefutable. The witness testimony was overwhelming. Vaughn had ignored all of it in favor of his racist assumptions, and he'd done it in front of cameras that captured every moment. Within a week, Officer Trent Vaughn was suspended pending a full investigation into his conduct and his history of complaints. The case became national news, appearing on major networks as an example of how racial bias can turn heroes into suspects, how even saving a child's life isn't enough to overcome prejudice when an officer is determined to see threat instead of heroism. Isaiah returned to work at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta 3 days after the incident, but his colleagues noticed he wasn't the same. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and during his shifts in the pediatric ER where he treated drowning victims and other emergencies, he found himself replaying the moment when saving a life had resulted in handcuffs instead of thanks. His hands, which had pulled Ethan from the water, still had marks on the wrists from where the metal had cut into his skin. The lawsuit he filed wasn't just about his own experience. It was about the pattern. His attorneys documented Vaughn's history of racial profiling, the 4 previous complaints that had been dismissed, the consistent targeting of black men in public spaces based on nothing but the officer's bias. They sued Vaughn personally and the Atlanta Police Department for false arrest, racial profiling, violation of civil rights, and emotional distress. The damages sought totaled $1.8 million. The case attracted support from unexpected places. The American Academy of Pediatrics issued a statement condemning the treatment of a physician who'd acted heroically to save a child. Medical associations across the country rallied behind Isaiah, pointing out that his professional training and instinct to save lives had been met with suspicion and detention. Children's Healthcare of Atlanta stood firmly behind him, with the CEO publicly stating that Dr. Bennett exemplified everything they valued in their physicians. The trial was covered nationally because the video evidence made it impossible to dispute what had happened. Jurors watched Jordan's footage showing the rescue, then watched other videos showing Isaiah being handcuffed while witnesses protested. They heard testimony from Ruth and James, from the jogger, from Jordan, from 8 different people who all told the same story. A hero was treated like a criminal because of his race. Vaughn tried to defend his actions by claiming he was prioritizing child safety and following his training to investigate all possibilities. But his own body camera footage, which he'd activated after arriving on scene, showed him dismissing witness testimony, barely looking at the video evidence, and focusing solely on his predetermined narrative that a black man near a white child must mean something suspicious had occurred. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. They found Vaughn liable for false arrest, racial profiling, and violation of civil rights. They found the Atlanta Police Department liable for maintaining a pattern of dismissing complaints against officers who showed clear racial bias. The damages awarded were $1.6 million, $1.1 million from the city, $500,000 in punitive damages against Vaughn personally. Vaughn was fired before the verdict came in. He lost his law enforcement certification permanently and faced criminal charges for deprivation of civil rights under color of law. He was convicted and sentenced to probation and community service and prohibited from ever working in law enforcement again. The Atlanta Police Department implemented sweeping reforms. Mandatory bias training became required quarterly instead of annually. A civilian review board was established to investigate all complaints of racial profiling. Officers who received multiple complaints were automatically flagged for additional oversight. Body cameras became mandatory for all park and community patrols. But for Isaiah, the victory felt incomplete. He'd won the case, changed policy, and received public recognition as a hero. The mayor gave him a commendation. The city council honored him. Children's Healthcare held a ceremony celebrating his actions. Ethan's parents wrote him a heartfelt apology letter and tried to arrange a meeting so Ethan could thank him properly. Yet Isaiah couldn't shake the trauma of what had happened. He developed anxiety about being in public spaces, especially parks. He second-guessed his instincts to help people because he'd learned that good deeds could be punished when filtered through racist assumptions. His colleagues noticed he was more hesitant, more cautious, and in a profession where split-second decisions saved lives, that hesitation was dangerous. 6 months after the incident, Isaiah was at Piedmont Park again, trying to reclaim the space that had become a source of trauma. He saw a child stumble near the water's edge and his body tensed, his mind running through calculations that had never existed before. If he helped, would he be seen as a hero or a threat? Would witnesses matter? Would video evidence be enough? For 3 seconds that felt like an eternity, he hesitated. Then his training overrode his fear, and he moved toward the child, who'd already recovered their balance and was fine. But those 3 seconds of hesitation haunted him because they represented what Vaughn's racism had stolen. His uncomplicated instinct to help, his belief that heroism would be recognized, his faith that doing the right thing would be enough. The settlement money sat in his bank account. Vaughn's career was destroyed, policies changed. The viral video had sparked national conversations about racial bias and how it punishes even heroes. Isaiah had won every legal battle and achieved systemic change. But he'd lost something too, the innocence of believing that saving a life would speak for itself, that professional credentials and witness testimony would outweigh racial bias, that his skin color wouldn't be the first thing people saw, even when he was pulling a child from drowning. The justice was real, the accountability was complete, but the cost was a burden he'd carry every time he saw someone in need and felt that split second of doubt that never should have existed. When heroism is met with handcuffs, something is fundamentally broken. Share this story if you believe saving lives deserves gratitude, not suspicion. Hit subscribe on JPTV for more cases where justice fought back against racial bias. Drop a comment. How do we protect Good Samaritans from profiling? See you in the next one.
Every historical record holds a profound story waiting to be carefully uncovered. Every story we explore is a deliberate step closer to the ultimate truth. Thank you for joining us on this vital journey of discovery today.